Which of these two lenses would you pick? You have the Tamron 20-40, and you also have the Sony 20-70.
This video is sponsored by PPA, the Professional Photographers of America. Join a community of over 34,000 photographers, find equipment insurance, education, and business tools made specifically for small business owners like you.
Now, the big appeal of the Tamron is that it can go to f2.8, whereas the Sony can only go to f4. Now, depending on whether you're shooting video or photo, you might find that f2.8 to f4 it may not be a deal breaker for you. If you have a Sony camera that has a second base ISO and you're shooting a lot of video, f4 is probably going to be more than enough. It's more so for aesthetic reasons, background blur, making it look a little bit nicer, getting that better bokeh. But practically speaking, in terms of how it looks, what is the difference between f2.8 and f4?
So this right here is at f2.8 on the Tamron. I've dirtied up the frame a little bit, got something in the foreground here, and then I've got that light back there just for you to see at f2.8. And now we'll change it to f4. And now we're at f4. So can you tell any difference between the two? You're mostly going to see it probably on how blurry this is, and maybe on the light in the background, maybe the light up here as well. You tell me.
If you want to take advantage of something like focus breathing compensation, you're going to be able to do it with a newer body like the A7 IV, the FX6 I'm shooting on right now, the A7R5. You can utilize this with that to have minimal, next to no focus breathing. Whereas with this, it's a third-party lens, it's not supported for those features within the bodies. Now the same thing applies to your IBIS. This will work with the IBIS within the Sony bodies, active stabilization, but it's actually going to be way better with the Sony lens than it is with a third-party lens. That's not just Tamron, that is Sigma lenses, any third-party lenses out there.
So this is working with the Sony A7R5 and the Tamron 20-40 with the active stabilization turned on. And now exactly the same thing with the A7R5 and the Sony 20-70, active stabilization on. Side-by-side comparison, it should be pretty obvious which one is which. A7R5 with the Tamron 20-40, active stabilization turned on, zoomed all the way into 40 and then back out to 20 there. This is if you were just to hold it, pretend it's a tripod. Exactly the same test now with the 20-70 all the way into 70 there and then back out to 20. Same settings as before.
How is the video autofocus on the Tamron compared to the Sony? Now I very much doubt there's going to be any form of autofocus issues between either of these lenses. We pretty much don't need to do this test anymore with any modern Sony body, but for the purposes of people that do want to see it, both at 20mm, both at f4.
So we've got the Sony on the left and we've got the Tamron on the right. I don't really need to say anything. It's quite obvious here that both perform very, very well in this kind of controlled situation. Now that autofocus test really didn't prove too much. It's just for a talking head thing like this. But one thing I will say is having used this now more out in the field quite a bit the past 2 weeks, comparing it with the 20-70, I do find that the focus on this is a bit hit and miss sometimes, especially when you get really close to things. It has a harder go compared to the Sony, and it does tend to hunt a little bit. Not all the time, but it's very sporadic. This video is sponsored by PPA, the Professional Photographers of America. If you're lucky enough to shoot photos or video professionally, you have a business. You may have a more established business, or you may have just started it. Either way, you know and I know that when you first start, there are things that you didn't know about, you didn't do because you were too lazy, you hoped they would go away and you never have to do them, but there comes a point in which you do have to do them, and that's where something like PPA might actually be able to help you out. The biggest thing being the camera, the tools that you use to do your job. Do you have those protected? If something happens to those tools, you don't have a business anymore, so you need to make sure it's protected. Now, for a low monthly price, PPA will give you equipment insurance up to $15,000. So if something happens, they'll give you the full replacement value for a flat fee of $350, the deductible. Or if you prefer to get it repaired, that is a $50 flat fee deductible. So let's talk about contracts, because you need contracts to protect yourself, to protect the clients that you're working with, and you don't know what you need to put in them when you first start. There's a lot of clauses and things, and it's not that fun. And this is another benefit of being a member with PPA. They give you downloadable, customizable contracts that you can use specifically tailored to your business needs. It's very easy just to ignore these things when you first start out. Believe me, I've been there, but don't. Get them set up properly now so you don't have to worry about them later. You always think that things aren't going to happen to you, but they will when you least expect it. That's going to be extra stress, extra time, probably lack of sleep, extra money. Just do it right now. Don't worry about it later. Protect yourself, protect your business. Let PPA help you with that. If this sounds like something you're interested in, click on the link down below. You can learn a little bit more, and if you do decide to sign up, that link will actually give you a special discount as well off your membership. Thank you, PPA, for sponsoring today's video.
I'm gonna guess without looking that the Sony's image quality for photos is going to be better, superior than the Tamron's, be that in terms of sharpness, lens imperfections.
Shouldn't have made that statement because I was actually quite wrong. Take a look. We've got some images to Pixel Peep in Lightroom right here. Now I haven't added any lens profile adjustments or corrections because I don't have them for the Sony, so it's not fair to add it for the Tamron and then not for the Sony. So things like distortion can be corrected with lens profiles when we have the one from the Sony 20-70. I have adjusted the exposure for the real estate stuff here. So on the left, we are going to throw the Tamron, and then on the right, the Sony. Now, the first thing that's immediately evident here is this was taken on a tripod, so same exact setup for each shot. Look how much more is in the frame on the Sony, even though they're both at 20. I'm guessing once the lens profile is added here, we probably will see a little bit more of a crop on the Sony, but needless to say, there's a lot more in the frame on the left, and then on the right as well. Look at the plant there, and you don't even see that there, so something to think about. Let's zoom into this fruit bowl right here. I mean, both have chromatic aberration on the edge of the bowl there. Very, very similar. You'd be hard pressed to tell the difference between those two. The Sony has a little bit more contrast on the edge of the quartz or granite countertop, whatever that is, and a little bit more contrast on the backsplash there, but in terms of overall sharpness, you really can't tell the difference. Let's throw the Tamron on the left and then the Sony on the right. Let's zoom into that wicker basket and then the same just there. You really can't tell the difference easily between those two. Not enough to make it obvious anyway. Tamron on the left, Sony on the right. Definitely more distortion on the Sony, but obviously that could probably be corrected. I mean, more contrast on the Sony, but really in terms of sharpness, this is at 20mm this, by the way, too. There's a negligible difference. What about if we go up to one of the corners here? The Tamron is sharper, interestingly. Now this is at f4, same thing, f8. Tamron is actually sharper than the Sony at 20mm. If you want to see what they look like at 20 to compare side by side, Tamron on the left, Sony on the right. That's the side-by-side view there. Look at the vignetting on there. Probably correctable again with the lens profiles though. What about if we look into the background of the city? So Tamron on the left, Sony on the right. You tell me if you can see any differences there. So the Tamron offers a huge amount of value in terms of image quality for photos, especially at 20mm in the corners at f4 and at f8.
Look at that view. Whew. So one thing I've noticed going back and forth now between the Tamron 20-40 and the Sony 20-70 here is I'm using that 40-70, mostly because I'm taking photos and video, but yeah, the 20-70 is more useful. f2.8, I'm not finding I'm needing it that much, but that's just for this kind of like vloggy travel style of stuff. So case in point right here, there's a waterfall right up there, and this is how I can get with 70 and the difference of 40.
I wanted to use the camera audio for this, but the waterfall wasn't having it. So that's actually at 70mm, and then that is at 40mm. So there's quite a big difference between 70 and 40.
This is as far as the Tamron can zoom in at 40mm, and then that's the Sony at 70mm. So big difference there in terms of how much you can zoom in.
Now feature-wise with these two lenses is where it really comes apparent in terms of your differences. Tamron is obviously a lot cheaper than the Sony, and the build quality echoes that. This feels very, very plasticky, whereas this is much more reminiscent of Sony's other G lenses, even like their G Master lenses. If you look at it side by side with the 135 GM there, really the only obvious way to tell the difference between the two is the orange G versus the black G. Same features, finish, color. Yeah, very similar, very impressive what Sony is doing there. This lens at its widest goes from 20 to 40. 20 is where the barrel is actually extended, and on the Sony, 20 to 70, and 70 is where the barrel is extended, much more like what you're used to. Side by side, that's how they look when the barrels are both depressed, and then when they're zoomed in, that is exactly how they look. The zoom rings are on the back here. Both feel very good. The Tamron is a lot looser than the Sony's. This is definitely much firmer. I do prefer this one. Zoom rings are both very similar if you look on the top-down angle there in terms of their size, their feel, their finish. And then the focus rings on the front there are, the Sony's a little bit bigger than the Tamron. This feels a lot looser than the Sony does. This feels much more controlled and nice. This isn't bad by any means, but I prefer this one. When it comes to features, the Tamron, That's it, there is nothing else. You have a USB-C port on the side there for updating your firmware. You got weather sealing on the back, 67mm filter thread on the front of the Tamron, 72 on the Sony. But that's feature-wise is all you get. On the Sony, you pretty much have everything you could possibly want. Weather sealing on the back there. Sony doesn't say it's 100% guaranteed, so take that however you will. Aperturing on the back, which I love seeing on lenses now. Makes it very versatile for if you want to shoot photo or video. It works for both because it's clicky, but also can be declicked by clicking the switch on the side there. And now it's smooth to change between apertures, which is really good for video. You also have the iris lock on the side there. So if you put it into the A mode and then lock this, that means you now control the aperture on the body directly and you can't accidentally take it out and change the aperture on the lens itself. Autofocus manual focus switch on the side, which I would have loved to have seen at least that on this, because that is very, very handy. You also have two customizable buttons, one on the side, which will be the left of the lens if you are pointing the lens at someone, and then one on the top as well, so you can customize those to whatever you want. So definitely a lot more features in the Sony, and if you need features on a lens for whatever reason, like I like features on a lens, I use them, I like the aperture ring, being able to control that. If you need that, go with the Sony over the Tamron because you just don't have any with this. If you also like build quality when it comes to a lens, go with the Sony. You will prefer it over the Tamron. Just holding them in the hand here, this definitely feels like a more premium lens, but the price tag echoes that too. Definitely a lot lighter in the hand compared to the Sony because it is. Also a lot smaller in the hand, again, because it is. Hopefully this allows you to see the differences between these two lenses and maybe make a buying decision, or maybe you're just watching, in which case, thank you. That's all I got for you. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.